Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, CDNs and Intelligence at the Edge, a Winning Combination. Before we jump into the presentation, I'd like to point out some of the features of the webinar platform we're using today. We plan to have time for Q&A at the conclusion of the presentation, so at any time you can submit your questions by typing them in the Ask a Question box, which appears under the slides being displayed on your screen. Also near the top right of your screen, I'd like to direct your attention to the Resources tab, where you can find several resources related to today's topic. And finally, it is my pleasure to introduce our speakers. First up is Charlie Russell, who is a Senior Product Marketing Manager with Limelight. He has over 25 years of experience in product management and product marketing with a strong background in video, networking, software, and storage. Our second presenter today is Steve Brown, who has over 20 years of combined experience in the areas of IP networking, content delivery networks, streaming video, and edge compute. He's a Senior Product Manager responsible for Limelight's new Edge Function Serverless Edge Compute platform. And with that, Charlie, the floor is yours.
Diana, thank you very much, and welcome to the CDNs and Intelligence at the Edge, a Winning Combination presentation that we have for you today. Here's the agenda. So first of all, CDN and Serverless Edge Compute are a natural fit. We'll see that. And talk about how serverless edge compute is different and the problems it can solve. And then how the ecosystem is evolving in the world we're facing today. And then wrapping up with how developers and ops teams can manage the intelligent edge, and finally introducing Limelight Edge Functions. So I'd like to start with a reference from IDC, a leading research firm on CDN and edge compute. This is a quote from IDC. As a majority of IP traffic will be CDN traffic, reaching around 80% by 2023, CDNs have an important role in advancing edge compute as the new paradigm for delivering rich media services. Probably a lot of folks attending this webinar are into delivering rich media services. First, I'd like to start with a quick illustration of how CDN and serverless at the edge can work together. So here we see a traditional CDN workflow where you have a request from a user, and the CDN then goes to retrieve that content from cache or origin and deliver it to the user. So this is basic CDN, which leverages edge compute by running the edge caching, cache management, delivery management software. But serverless lets you do more at the edge. So you can apply business logic. Now, some examples of business logic gives organizations the ability to apply your own rules to content delivery workflows to create a more advanced, enhanced experience for your end users. That business logic can be based on any number of decision criteria, the geography, demographics, what device the user is contacting with, any individual user attributes, the time of day, content metadata, any number of factors that might drive this business logic. And based on that business logic, which can run in a serverless edge compute platform, you might get custom content, for example. And then you would apply a control logic that says, all right, now we've got these two flows in this case, in this example. How can we manipulate, such as manifest manipulation, the delivery and caching, to really, again, create that compelling user experience. And so here we have CDN and serverless working together to let you, the customer, you, the business, enhance the delivery that you're using the CDN for. So that's the basic why we're here, and it's to solve of business needs. We have many examples, including complex video workflows and latency. So complexity and latency are really growing in today's environment. Cloud native. Many of you might be already moving to cloud native, shifting from a monolithic application architecture to a microservices architecture. And so those kinds of shifts really take advantage of resources like edge compute. And then finally, for developers in particular that are in DevOps environments where CI, CD, continuous integration, continuous delivery, and deployment can really take advantage of a CDN. And so the end result of all this is that more customization, and while reducing latency, while improving scale, all of these business needs are kind of driving in this same direction. So why the edge, and as opposed to centralized serverless compute, right? There's a lot of serverless platforms that centralize processing in a limited number of large-scale data centers in a few locations in the world. And so that's the top row that you see here, this centralized serverless compute. And there can be a lot of latency with a centralized approach. Serverless at the edge has a potential to dramatically reduce latency. If you've got a distributed environment where there's a compute that's distributed and where it's served from the closest location to each user, it can dramatically reduce latency. Now, there's a lot of different views of what is the edge, and this optimal edge is at where the CDN meets the last mile networks. This is really where the action is. It's close to the users. You get a user request that lands on their ISP, their last mile provider. And if that's close to the delivery network, directly connected to the delivery network, you get a lot of efficiencies at this optimal edge. Efficiencies of reach, efficiencies of scale, efficiencies of latency. And that really lets you create a lot of new, customized, personalized, dynamic content while maximizing customer reach. So this optimal edge where the delivery network meets the ISPs is where the action is. So let's talk about the impact on developers, because developers can have to deal with a lot in terms of managing infrastructure and worrying about all of that, worrying about paying for it, worrying about how you scale it. And with serverless, those worries go away. If you look at this image over on the right, everything that's in green is managed by a serverless provider. So the developer, your developer, doesn't need to worry about that. The developer just calls compute functions via API, and it's much more efficient, much more streamlined, and it really lets the developers focus on delivering a high-value application rather than worrying about all the infrastructure. Just a comment on serverless. You see this fourth bullet here. Short-lived, stateless functions are really the best use for serverless. So the benefits are, again, very easy to work with. Lets the developers really focus on the task at hand, high availability, and fault tolerance. And so I hope that gives you sort of a brief overview of what serverless is, and what it's about, and how it works well with a CDN. At that optimal edge where the delivery network meets the last mile networks. So now let's talk about applications and the growing ecosystem around it. And for that, I'd like to pass the baton to Steve Brown, Senior Product Manager for Limelight Networks. Steve, take it away.
Thanks, Charlie. So we see that the real critical difference of the serverless edge versus the centralized edge and centralized computing generally is in the applications that the serverless edge can enable. We're seeing a number of use case types that businesses are asking for help in solving. And, we can talk about a few of those here. You'll notice that, a lot of these are, media consumption related, such as personalized streaming. HTTP adaptive bitrate streaming, which has been common now for 5 years and more, where MPEG-dash or HLS are the streaming formats, they lend themselves very well to personalization, and the optimal place to do that really is at the CDN edge. We talked before about that, that match of the last mile networks where it's easy to get to the consumer eyeballs with the greatest reach and the best balance of latency. Personalized streaming is something that can be based on a user's device, for example, limiting bandwidth or frame rates to what the media player on that particular device can handle. It can leverage information that the streaming content provider has about the end consumer to construct personalized playlists, for example. So we see edge compute as being, serverless edge compute being an ideal tool for creating those personalized experiences by leveraging the low latency of being at the edge and the beauty of serverless for running short-lived functions. Access control and compliance is another one. We're seeing a lot of use of JSON web tokens, for example, to encapsulate information about a user as to whether they are entitled to particular content by virtue of their having the token in the first place. Embedded in there can be details of the nature of the access to content that is in question. It could be limited by geography, what have you. And the serverless compute platforms, in conjunction with the CDN, can validate and authorize access to video or block access to video. Dynamic ad insertion is another one where HTTP AVR streaming methods make it very straightforward to do server-side video ad insertion, and moving that to the edge where you can take advantage of latency advantages and tie into the rest of the ad network. We're seeing a lot of interest in that. Forensic watermarking, especially in the era of COVID, and we're seeing movie theater windows being reduced in some cases from 75 days to 15 days. It makes the streaming content rights all that much more valuable. And we're seeing lots of content owners now wanting to protect their content with forensic watermarking solutions that allow them to detect piracy down to the individual viewer who actually leaked the stream. And we're seeing providers wanting to leverage serverless techniques at the edge to do that. Object manipulation. It's straightforward at the edge to do certain video and image manipulations, so that content that's moving through the CDN, using serverless technologies, organizations can provide their own logic to manipulate those. A simple case would be to resize an image. Another would be to actually use a technique to watermark that image. So there's some overlap in use cases there. A/B testing is another one where content owners, experience providers can test various versions of their website or content library and measure the impact on user satisfaction, on sales, what have you. And not all of these use cases are one way. There is a need for data collection and normalization from clients, especially media consuming clients, and from the variety of media consuming clients that we see, there's a need for normalization and pre-processing of data before it gets sent to cloud analytics and processing engines. So these are just some of the use cases that are ideal for serverless compute at the edge as part of CDN workflows. So there's an ecosystem associated with the edge. Initially, CDNs were all about basic delivery. They were the original edge app, but they had some qualities that are interesting for some of the use cases we've just talked about today. CDN delivery always was bandwidth intensive. It was all about saving bandwidth in the core network and delivering from the edge of the network. They're inherently distributed. They're inherently about low latency, being close to the user, and they're inherently about massive scale. So this network, the pre-existing CDN network, is an excellent basis from which to build other edge services. By overlaying serverless compute technology with the CDN, we're empowering businesses and other organizations to bring their own business logic and control logic, as Charlie spoke about earlier. That business logic, using decision criteria about geography, time of day, demographics, personal information, and that control logic about where to source content. What is the composition of that content, the format of that content? Do you want to block or allow access to that content or provide any other filtration of that content? These are the kinds of things that serverless compute empower organizations to take control of when they are leveraging delivery platforms like CDNs. This is an ecosystem that's evolving to draw new entrants. We're seeing new market entrants that are not end CDN users or not necessarily CDN vendors themselves, but that have value-added services to provide. So we're seeing a network effect take place where third parties recognize the value of compute at the edge, of serverless compute at the edge, and the proximity to delivery workflows to bring new value-added services and deliver additional business value. New business models can be constructed in an environment like this. More rapid innovation and evolution, essentially we see a network effect, and that's just a fertile ground for all kinds of advancement, both in, technically and from a business perspective. So some of the areas where we're seeing entities leveraging serverless compute in conjunction with CDN to help end customers are anti-piracy, like forensic watermarking. We said there are vendors who specialize in forensic watermarking who are gravitating to serverless, making serverless code available for their customers to use on the serverless platforms of CDNs. There are vendors who specialize in sophisticated A/B experimentation software looking to the serverless compute platforms at the CDNs to enable their customers to put together sophisticated campaigns, creating targeted experiences, and then taking the feedback on those experiences. There are ad platforms that are becoming distributed and moving to the edge that are leveraging serverless edge compute in conjunction with delivery to effect their advertising decisions. Geolocation services are looking into this to provide customers with more sophisticated use cases for filtering content based on geographic location or topographical location within the network, such as being behind a VPN. Identity management is another one. So it's bringing together the brain power and value creation from across the industry. So how are developers and ops teams managing and monitoring serverless at the edge? Here's where I like to make the point that we earlier talked about the types of applications being the key difference between serverless edge compute versus cloud serverless compute. But what we see in common is how developers monitor and manage the edge compute development and deployment. APIs are used, as has been common with cloud compute and microservices workflows for years. CLIs and other tools to make it easier to do create, read, update operations. Third-party toolkits like Terraform, Circle CI, Ansible, Bamboo, Jenkins are also in common use. Sample code is being made available by serverless platform providers. It's very similar to developing for the cloud, and this is a good thing because this aspect of edge serverless does not need to be reinvented. People already have become familiar. And so now I'd like to take a few minutes to discuss Limelight's foray into this space. Limelight Edge Functions recently launched, and we couldn't be more thrilled. Edge Functions is enabling developers to write functions and deploy them at the edge of the Limelight network. So those points we made earlier about the optimal place in the network, Limelight CDN is at the optimal place in the network. So low latency serverless compute tasks can be undertaken by our customers. Their code is made globally available to execute at the closest site, scales automatically. There are no infrastructure worries because it is serverless. It's ideal for video delivery because it's integrated with our global network with over 1,000 peering connections worldwide. Like serverless solutions more broadly, it's API-driven with an easy-to-use RESTful API. We have all new documentation and developer tools in conjunction with the launch of Edge Functions. And we've launched with 3 very powerful and commonly used languages in Node.js, Python, and Go. And it's really about being developer-friendly, empowering developers to craft unique experiences associated with content delivery. The APIs, the CLI that we provide, continuous integration and continuous deployment tools. We're supporting Terraform as the first CI/CD tool that we support, and we're excited about that, and so do our customers seem to be excited. And we're providing sample code for common use cases like A/B testing, JSON Web Token evaluation, and image resize on our public GitHub platform. And some of those use cases that we talked about earlier, we're seeing customers tackle with Edge Functions today. Let's focus on a couple of those. Thwarting piracy with Edge Functions and NAGRA forensic watermarking. We've been working with NAGRA and their NextGuard solution to help a major North American streaming video provider deter media piracy. Media piracy is extremely costly to media organizations, and forensic watermarking allows them to have a deterrent to that because they can identify the source of individual content leaks. In this particular case, individual media streams, 2 versions are created, and a unique pattern needs to be established at the session level, and that really needs to be done in conjunction with the CDN because that's where the streaming session is actually taking place between the CDN edge and the end user. And so the CDN serverless platform is leveraging the NAGRA NextGuard algorithms, in this case, to create a unique pattern that can be subsequently detected in the case of a piracy event. Another use case we talked about was object manipulation. We're working with a customer who needs to do a tremendous amount of image resizing. They have base images of full size and resolution, and they need to deliver those images in various web consumption environments where they could be as small as a thumbnail or part of a screen or delivered to a mobile device, and thus they need to be resized. But they only want to do this when they need to. And so they use the edge function to resize on the fly and cache the result. And then if that version of the image is requested again, it's taken from the CDN cache. So I hope you can see that edge functions is touching on some of the key aspects of serverless edge compute and its power that Charlie established earlier in the presentation. It's enabling people to innovate, empowering developers and organizations to take control over the services that they deliver and create new exciting services for their end customers, and all the while reducing latency and taking advantage of global scale and reach. So I'd like to thank folks for taking time to listen today, and we're happy to take questions.
All right. Steve, thank you very much. Our first question, what is the impact of COVID work at home, overloading of internet bandwidth on delivery of rich media content?
That's a great question, Charlie. If you don't mind, I'll take that one. Well, we at Limelight, like others in this business, as has been seen in the press, are seeing a significant increase in traffic. People are working from home. They're leveraging the internet for all kinds of things all day. And they're also leveraging media and entertainment content both during the day and in the typical after work hours. So there's a lot of pressure for bandwidth usage, and that just increases and accelerates, in our opinion, the need to adopt other services at the edge to keep the experiences highly performant and to keep pushing the envelope in creating new and exciting experiences. It's going to be more and more important to make sure that you're in the right place on the network, and increasingly that's the edge.
Great. Okay, the next question, this was actually, some folks had submitted questions when they registered, and here's one from Europe. What about ad servers at the edge? Now, Steve, you did cover dynamic ad insertion. Anything particular you would like to add on that comment?
I just briefly, yeah, I mean, the whole notion of server-side ad insertion has been around for a while now. The technical solutions have been evolving, but there is a real advantage by moving some of that decisioning logic to the edge. And when one is dealing with streaming video and talking about personalization down to the individual user level, the edge is really, we see as the right place to do that. So we see those technologies moving out to the edge increasingly, and the ecosystem moving out to the edge to facilitate that.
Great. The next question that we have is, how do you know when to use serverless and when to use containers?
That's a very good question. Well, you know, one thing about serverless functions, and for the workflows that we talked about earlier, it needs to be a short-lived operation in order to maintain user experiences. And while there are solutions for dealing with statefulness, by and large, the best use cases are stateless. So they're atomic, short-term actions. Containers can be better where you have multiple microservices, for example, that might need to be orchestrated together and be longer lived, or there are steadier workloads as opposed to spiky workloads.
All right. We do have one more question about removal of outdated content, which is essentially a reference to our purge capabilities. Limelight has a smart purge functionality which can purge, has purged over 1 billion objects in less than 1 second. And that can be invoked from edge functions if you have a reason to do that. It can also be managed centrally. At this point, we have reached the 30-minute mark, and we have some other questions which we can handle offline. I would like to thank everyone for your time, thank everyone for attending today. We hope this has been informative, and we really invite more engagement. If you have further questions, feel free to reach out to us, to Steve and me directly, to other folks that you might know within the Limelight organization. We're very excited about edge functions and about the potential that it has to enable new innovative workflows, to dramatically reduce latency, to allow you to scale globally, and again, welcome your engagement. With that, I'll say thank you, everyone. I hope you have a great rest of your day. Bye.